My name is Carolyn Harris. I'm 62, a retired school principal, and until last Saturday, I thought I knew what it meant to be a mother. That changed when my only daughter, Emily, looked me in the eye on the day of her wedding and asked me to leave. It didn't happen in private. It didn't come with a whisper or a tearful apology. It came like a slap in the middle of the grand ballroom at the Crestwood Hotel, just as the string quartet was tuning their instruments and guests were taking their seats under a $1,000 floral arch. "You shouldn't be here, Mom. You promised not to make this day about you. Please go." Her voice was firm, public, cold. And when she turned away without waiting for me to respond, the air in the room shifted. Guests avoided my eyes. Someone coughed. A photographer pretended to adjust his lens. I stood there in my navy blue dress, pearls tight around my throat, watching the child I raised banish me from the happiest day of her life. The humiliation burned hot and fast, but beneath it, something colder had already taken root. A truth I discovered weeks earlier. A truth she wasn't ready to hear. So I nodded, smiled even, and turned to walk away. But I didn't leave the building. I took a sharp left past the catering staff and walked straight into the side hallway, where the light was dim and the walls were lined with framed photos of past weddings. I waited there for 5 full minutes before I sent the message. "He's here. Be ready." Then I stepped back into the reception area, slower this time. The music had stopped. Emily stood near the altar, radiant and oblivious, adjusting her veil, while guests murmured in low tones. Beside her, Brandon, the man she thought she was marrying, looked calm, composed, entirely unaware of what was coming. That's when I raised my voice, loud enough to cut through the awkward chatter. "Sorry to interrupt, but before I go, there's someone here who would really like a word with the groom." Every head turned. Brandon's smile faltered, and Emily's hand froze halfway to her hair. Just as the ballroom doors opened behind me, I stepped aside. Let's just say weddings are a lovely time for reunions, especially the kind no one saw coming. Emily met Brandon at a charity mixer hosted by her law firm. She was working as a junior associate, juggling long hours and brutal deadlines, and he was the charming, confident guest speaker who strolled in wearing a perfect suit and a smile that made half the room forget their names. She called me that night and said, "Mom, I think I just met someone who actually listens." Brandon was polished, polite to the point of being a little too polished. He held doors, remembered anniversaries, and sent handwritten thank you notes after dinners. The kind of man you don't expect your 30-year-old daughter to fall for because he felt like something out of an old movie. But Emily was glowing, happier than I'd seen her since college, and after all the years she'd spent building a career, I figured maybe she deserved a little fairy tale. The first time I met him, he brought flowers. Not just for Emily, but for me too. Lilies, because Emily told him they were my favorite. He asked questions. He complimented the roast chicken I'd made. He even offered to help with the dishes. And yet, when he left, I found myself staring at the sink and wondering why it all felt rehearsed. Over the next few months, they got serious. Fast. Weekend trips, matching savings accounts, talk of a house in the suburbs. He said all the right things about commitment and children, and he said them in the tone of someone who'd memorized exactly how those things were supposed to sound. Every time Emily looked at him, I saw nothing but adoration. Every time he looked at her, I saw something else I couldn't name. I brushed off the unease. Maybe I was just being overprotective. Widowed moms get weird about change. But then, little things started to add up. Brandon was always vague about his family. His mother had passed, he said. His father lived abroad. He never spoke of siblings, yet once he slipped and mentioned growing up with a brother, he then changed the subject. He traveled often. For work, supposedly. Consulting for private clients. But his stories about where he'd been never quite lined up. And he never used a credit card. Always cash. Said he didn't trust banks. He'd smile when he said it, like it was some cute quirk. But there was nothing cute about someone who managed money that carefully and lived so well. Still, I didn't question it. Not out loud. I convinced myself I was looking for flaws where there were none. I told myself to focus on how happy Emily seemed. When they got engaged, I cried. When they asked me to help plan the wedding, I said yes, without hesitation. I took out part of my retirement savings. I booked venues, ordered flowers, and even offered Emily my grandmother's necklace. Because I loved my daughter. And because I wanted to believe. This man she chose was exactly who he claimed to be. For a while, I almost believed it too. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. I stopped by Emily's townhouse to drop off some swatches for the bridesmaids' dresses. She was still at work, but Brandon was there, home early, supposedly working remotely from her dining room table. The door was unlocked, so I stepped in like I always did. I heard his voice before I saw him. Calm, low, focused. He was pacing upstairs, on the phone, saying things I wasn't supposed to hear. I froze at the bottom of the staircase. No, don't worry. Her mom's covering most of it. Once the wedding's over, she'll probably offer to help with the house too. That woman's practically begging for a son-in-law. I'll get access to the accounts by the end of the month. I couldn't move. My breath caught somewhere between my ribs and my throat. He sounded so casual, so clinical, like Emily and I were line items on a spreadsheet. There was a pause, then laughter, a dry, humorless kind. And then he said it. Just smile, nod, and let them think they've got the perfect man. It always works. My knees nearly buckled. I backed out of the house as quietly as I could, heart pounding, palms slick with sweat. Once I was in the car, I sat there gripping the wheel, staring at the dashboard like it could explain what I'd just heard. My first instinct was to confront him. My second was to call Emily. I did neither. Instead, I went home, poured a glass of wine I didn't drink, and pulled out my laptop. I typed in 4 words I never imagined I'd search. Private investigator near me. That's how I found Lena Hartman, ex-FBI, now working freelance. Her reviews were sharp. Her responses sharper. I sent her a message that night. She called me the next morning. By the following Tuesday, we were sitting across from each other at a bakery on Oak Street. I slid her a manila folder with Brandon's details, and she slid me a notepad with questions. She didn't promise anything, just facts. I didn't want drama. I didn't want to ruin Emily's engagement. I just needed the truth. And if what I'd heard was even half real, I was going to do whatever it took to protect my daughter from the man she thought she loved. Lena didn't waste time. By the end of that first week, she had already pulled more on Brandon than I thought possible. She met me at the same bakery, this time with a laptop and a folder thick enough to make my stomach turn before I even opened it. The first red flag was his name. Brandon Wexler wasn't his legal name. His real name was Dylan Carter. He'd changed it in Arizona 6 years ago, after a brief, quiet annulment to a woman 15 years older than him. That marriage lasted 8 months. She filed for divorce after he drained her retirement savings and disappeared. He resurfaced 2 years later in Nevada, under yet another name. This time, he worked for a short-lived medical billing firm that folded under a fraud investigation. He wasn't charged, but 3 of his coworkers were. The firm had been skimming insurance payouts from terminally ill patients and their families. Lena showed me the court documents. Dylan's name was buried in the witness logs. No address, no employment trail after that. He simply vanished again. She found photos too. One showed him with a woman in her 40s outside a real estate conference in Tampa. The woman had filed a police report a year later, claiming her boyfriend had stolen $20,000 from her under the pretense of investing in a startup. The photo matched. Same smile, same suit, same watch he wore the day he asked for my blessing to marry Emily. Every detail chipped away at the man I thought I knew. The impeccable manners, the expensive taste, the charming little quirks, all part of a performance, built from years of practice. Lena explained it clearly. He's a romance fraudster. He doesn't just target women for money. He targets women for identity, for lifestyle, for access. Then he moves on. She even traced the car he drove. It was leased under a company that didn't exist anymore. The email he used for wedding vendors bounced from a server in Panama. The more she uncovered, the more carefully constructed it all became. I sat there, hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug of tea, listening to my daughter's future unravel one document at a time. But Lena wasn't done. She leaned in and said, "There's something else. He's being watched." Apparently, someone had already been looking into Brandon. A private party. Another name kept popping up in Lena's dig, Tommy Reese. She found his number linked to old Reddit threads about fraud victims and quietly active forums for survivors of financial abuse. Tommy hadn't posted much, but his few comments made something clear. He had a history with Dylan Carter. Deep, personal history. I didn't ask too many questions. I just said, "Can you get me a number?" Lena nodded. "Already? In your inbox?" That was the moment I stopped wondering whether I was overreacting and started accepting the truth. My daughter wasn't marrying a man, she was walking straight into a trap I now understood, and one I was going to tear down, brick by brick. Before she said "I do," I didn't know what to expect when Tommy answered the phone. His voice was quiet, guarded, like someone who'd forgotten how to trust. I introduced myself, told him I was the mother of Brandon's fiancée. That seemed to catch his attention. He didn't ask how I got his number. Just said, "I've been waiting for this call for 2 years." We agreed to meet the next day at a diner, halfway between our towns. He arrived early, nervous, restless, the kind of man who'd been carrying a story too long with no one willing to believe it. He called him Alex. That's the name Brandon used when they were together. They'd met at a gym in Dallas. Brandon, or Alex, then had charmed him with the same smile, the same stories, the same flawless surface. They were together for 7 months before Brandon disappeared with Tommy's savings and identity paperwork, leaving behind a trail of debt and a broken lease. Tommy never told his family. A part of him still felt ashamed for falling for someone so completely fake. He tried reporting it, but no one took a romance scam between 2 men seriously. They thought he'd been foolish, not defrauded. He said he stopped trusting people after that, until he saw Brandon's face pop up again, this time in a wedding announcement online. With my daughter. He said he didn't know if he was angrier for what had been done to him or terrified that it was about to happen again to someone else. That's when I reached across the table and put my hand over his. "You're not alone anymore." His eyes welled up, and I think mine did too. 2 strangers, bound, not by pity, but by the quiet fury of people who'd been deceived and left behind. We talked for nearly 3 hours. By the end, we had a plan. I would handle the vendors, the venue, and the legal side. He would show up at the wedding, not to cause a scene, but to tell the truth, calmly, clearly, publicly. We weren't looking for revenge. We were looking to stop history from repeating itself. Tommy said, "If this saves her, I'll finally be able to let go." I nodded. Me too. The Monday before the wedding, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook, a phone, and a black coffee that had long gone cold. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even afraid. I was focused. I had one job left, and I intended to carry it out with the precision of a surgeon. First, I called the florist, then the caterer, then the venue coordinator. Each conversation began the same way. "There's been a change in the payment arrangement. The groom's family has offered to take care of the final balance." It felt strange how easy it was. No one questioned it. I even sounded cheerful. "I'm just so glad everyone's coming together," I told them. "Just wait to process anything from my account. You'll hear from them directly." Of course, no one would. The number I gave belonged to a burner phone connected to nothing and no one. By the time they figured it out, the wedding would already be underway. Or unraveling. Either way, they'd be too late to stop it. And the financial mess would be Brandon's to explain, not mine. Next, I gathered every piece of evidence Lena and Tommy had shared with me. Screenshots, photos, recorded voicemails, a scanned police report. I loaded it all onto a flash drive, labeled it with Emily's name, and placed it in a jewelry box she loved as a child. If something went wrong, if Brandon somehow twisted the story, I would hand it to her myself and pray she'd believe me. But that was the backup plan. The real plan came together in a quiet call with Tommy on Wednesday night. We reviewed every step. He would arrive an hour before the ceremony, wait outside in his car until I give the signal. Then he would walk in through the side entrance, just as Brandon stepped up to say his vows. We rehearsed what he'd say, how he'd say it, calm, honest. No shouting, no theatrics, just the truth. I knew it would crush Emily. I knew it would humiliate her. But I also knew something deeper, that no matter how painful, betrayal exposed is better than betrayal lived in silence. I wasn't trying to ruin her day. I was trying to save her life. Maybe not in the literal sense, but in the slow, steady erosion of who she might become if she married a man who saw her as a bank account. On Friday, I packed a simple dress. I canceled my hair appointment. I wrote a note I hoped I wouldn't have to use. And I slept for the first time in weeks. Because I wasn't walking into a wedding anymore. I was walking into a reckoning. And I was ready. The music had just faded. Emily stood at the altar, bouquet trembling slightly in her hands, looking like a dream in satin and lace. Brandon stood across from her, the picture of composure, smiling at the minister like nothing in the world could touch him. Then, the side door creaked open. I didn't have to turn around. I already knew it was Tommy. He walked in slowly, head high, eyes fixed on Brandon. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said the name, Dylan Carter. And just like that, the air inside the chapel collapsed. Brandon's smile flickered. A full second passed before he responded. "You've got the wrong person." But his voice cracked halfway through. Emily looked between them, confused, already retreating behind her smile, like she could will this interruption into nothing. Tommy pulled a small envelope from his jacket and held it up. Inside were copies of photos, credit card statements, a copy of a police report. Then, he took out his phone, played a recording. The sound of Brandon's voice filled the chapel. Cold, calculated. "She's basically a walking trust fund. All I have to do is show up, smile, and keep her thinking I'm some big shot. Once the accounts are merged, it's done." Gasps rippled through the pews. A bridesmaid stepped back, knocking over a chair. The minister stood frozen, holding his prayer book like a shield. Emily dropped her bouquet. Brandon moved then, reached for her hand, tried to explain, said it was a joke, taken out of context, something stupid he said years ago, but the panic in his voice betrayed him. His face had gone pale, his charm was slipping fast. Emily stepped away, her voice was barely a whisper. "Is any of this true?" Brandon looked at me, just for a second, and in that second, I think he knew this wasn't an accident, that he'd been cornered, not by one person, but by the people he underestimated most. I took a step forward, not speaking yet, letting the silence do the work, letting the weight of what Tommy brought into that room settle like dust after an explosion. The guests didn't know what to do. Some whispered, some stared at their phones. One man started filming. Emily was trembling now, her hands clutched at her sides like she didn't know where to put them. And Brandon? He tried to smile again, but it came out crooked. Tommy's voice was steady. "You want the rest? I've got screenshots. And one more recording. That's where you call her your financial cow. Remember that? Because I do." The words hit harder than I thought they would. I watched my daughter's eyes widen, then harden. She turned toward Brandon with a look I'd never seen on her face before. And for the first time since she was a child, I saw her break. Not in fear, in clarity. Brandon tried to speak, but it was too late. The room was no longer his to control. The sirens were faint at first, just a low hum in the distance. But as the flashing lights lit up the stained glass windows behind the altar, The entire room seemed to stop breathing. 2 agents walked in, no drama, no shouting, just a quiet purpose. They moved straight toward Brandon, showed their badges, and spoke softly. He didn't resist. He didn't even speak. Just stood there, hands shaking as they cuffed him in front of the guests and led him out through the same door Tommy had entered. No one applauded. No one screamed. The silence was the loudest thing in the room. Emily didn't cry. Not right away. She just stood there, frozen, veil slipping off her head, eyes staring at the space where Brandon had just been. I wanted to run to her, to hold her, but I waited, gave her space to let the shock pass. She looked at me, slowly, as if seeing me for the first time all over again. Then she took one step, then another, and then she was in my arms, her body collapsing into mine, shaking with sobs that came from somewhere deep inside. We didn't speak. There were no apologies, no explanations. Just the sound of her grief filled the hollow space where a future had once lived. I held her tighter than I ever had before. Not as a mother who had warned her, not as someone who had been right, just as someone who had loved her through it all. She buried her face in my shoulder and cried like she did when she was small, when scraped knees or nightmares needed nothing but the safety of being held. Guests began to slip out, some quietly offering nods, others too stunned to speak. The wedding decorations looked surreal now. The flowers, the lights, the untouched cake. It all belonged to a different world, one that never really existed. Emily whispered something then, so soft I almost missed it. Thank you. I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because in that moment, there was nothing left to say. We had both lost something, but we had also found our way back to each other. And that was enough. For a while, Emily didn't say much. She stayed quiet, moved back home for a few weeks, didn't talk about the wedding, didn't bring up Brandon. I gave her space, let her heal in her own way. Some wounds don't need words, they just need time. A month later, we were having tea on the porch when she finally looked at me and said it. I was so angry at you, but now I see you didn't try to ruin my wedding. You saved my life. I nodded. Didn't need her to say more. The relief in her voice was enough. That afternoon, I gave her the pearl necklace, the one passed down from my mother, the one I had offered before when she thought she was marrying the right man. She held it longer this time. Didn't put it on. Just said, someday, when it's real. I smiled. That was all I needed. You know, people talk a lot about unconditional love, but what they don't say is that sometimes loving someone means doing the hard thing, the thing that makes them hate you, the thing that makes them walk away, at least for a little while. Because deep down, you're not trying to be liked. You're trying to keep them whole. So now I'll ask you, have you ever loved someone enough to let them hate you, just so you could protect them? And if you had to do it again, would you? I did. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Because that's what love is. Not perfect, but fierce, quiet, and strong enough to wait for the truth to catch up.